Shalom Israel, grace and blessings from God the Father of our Lord Jesus Christ be unto you. All praises to the Most High. We've made it another week to another Sabbath day. And I apologize for my slight tardiness. Had a lot of materials to get prepared, and I kind of waited to the last minute to do it. Again, my apologies. But let me just check and make sure everything's functioning the way it should be. Check, make sure everything's functioning the way it should be. At least on this end, we are live on Facebook and we're live on YouTube. All praise to the Most High for that. Let me check and make sure when people watching it, they can see it. Let's see. We'll go ahead and turn my phone on silent. What do we got here? Okay. Where are we at? Okay, we're live on YouTube. Okay, all praises to the Most High. Audio seems to be doing all right. It's about Facebook. Audio seems to be okay. All praises to the Most High for that as well. Okay, so we're not going to be able to touch on the major news story that I've seen this week, again, other than World War III escalating in the Middle East. Talked about that a bit week before last, so I don't want to touch on that this week. Maybe in a couple of weeks we'll circle back around to that. Trump tariffs, there's all that going on as far as not even the tariffs. What did I see about him? I think he's trying to jail a judge who disagrees with him, or he's trying to arrest a judge who disagrees with him, something like that as far as like the deportations are concerned. And we're going to touch the deportations a little bit, but it's really going to be like a transition into our main story this week, which is the history of Venezuela. But really the main story that we're not touching on that I've seen in the past week is the Pope died. And we're not touching on that because I touched on that back in February, where it looked like he was dying. And I said, it looks like he's dying. I'm surprised it took him 7.5, 8 weeks to do so, if I'm being quite honest. So he's dead. I'm not going to, I'm going to cast down Catholicism a little bit tonight. But from the context of how it was pushed so heavily on the northern kingdom of Israel, on the so-called Latinos, all right, specifically concerning Venezuela. And I'm only going to touch on that briefly. I'm not really going to touch on that too much, but we can go ahead and get into it. We'll go ahead and get started. I'll bring this down and we'll go ahead and get started. All right. About right there is fine. All right, so we'll start here with this article that I found. It says Venezuelans in state of uncertainty over U.S. temporary protected status, right? Because Trump does not care about the temporary protected status that he gives these people, right? He's just walking all over it. We talked about that a couple weeks ago when talking about the deportations. Trump's push to end status shielding foreign nationals from deportation to dangerous countries has everyone afraid. In Fort Worth, the toughest part of Ana Maria Flores Tamayo's job, y'all forgive me with some of these names, is seeing the trauma etched into the faces of the refugees she helps. That trauma was clear when she and her husband traveled to Aurora, Colorado last year to meet with Venezuelans living in the U.S. Everyone's afraid, said Tamayo, 69. The age of 69, who leads the Refugee Support Network, among other services. Her organization helps people fleeing their home country apply for temporary protected status in the U.S. They were leaving because things were terrible there. She said of the people she met in Colorado, most of them did not talk too much about it except to say that this was the chance for them to live here legally. All right, because that's what people, especially in Latin America, do, right? When there's trouble in their country, they tend to immigrate north to the U.S., right? Because the U.S. loves to brag about being the best country in the world, so other countries' citizens want to come here, right? It is what it is. refugees, oftentimes. TPS is a designation created by the U.S. government in 1990. In 1990, to shield foreign nationals already in the country from deportation to countries designated unsafe to return to. President Donald Trump announced in February that nearly 300,000 Venezuelans would be stripped of their TPS on Thursday. But a U.S. federal judge blocked the move the following month, saying the Trump administration's characterization of the migrants as criminals smacks of racism. Imagine that. Trump being racist towards immigrants. That's literally what he ran on in 2015, what he ran on this time as well. I mean, it's to be expected. Tamayo's husband, Andres Pacheco, age 64, told Al Jazeera that until now, TPS was a relatively easy process compared with asylum claims. But he worries that the status could soon no longer be an option for some people. The only problem with TPS is that it only goes up to 18 months, says Pacheco. I'll go with Pacheco, who runs a legal aid nonprofit for immigrants in Texas. So these are people who live in a state of uncertainty, right? Got to renew their, ability to be here every 18 months. A war zone in Colorado, quote unquote war zone in Colorado. All right. In March, the Trump administration announced it would revoke the temporary legal status of over 500,000 people, including Cubans, Haitians, Nicaraguans, and Venezuelans, according to a Federal Register notice. And if you notice, it's Latinos and Black people. He didn't say he's going to, revoke the legal status of Swedish immigrants. He didn't say he's going to revoke the legal status of British immigrants. No. Just Cubans, Haitians, Nicaraguans, and Venezuelans. And obviously we know how he feels about Mexicans and Guatemalans as well. All right. Despite studies consistently showing that undocumented immigrants commit crimes at lower rates than U.S. citizens, Trump cast migrant crime as a central point of his presidential campaign. You see that right there? So a lot of people that talk about this immigration stuff, they don't even realize that studies consistently show that undocumented immigrants commit crimes at lower rates than U.S. citizens, right? Because, it makes sense. If you're trying to stay out the way of the law, you're not going to do many illegal things, all right? It just makes sense. But, of course, people who are big on immigration, they don't take that into consideration because they, are led by their hatred and racism mostly. Trump also echoed unproven claims about Venezuela's Tren de Aragua gang during his campaign rallies, including an October stop in Aurora, where such fears had emerged. He went on to call the city a war zone and used the issue to attack Democrats and stoke voter fears, warning that migrant criminals would rape, pillage, thieve, plunder, and kill the people of the United States of America. And that again, that's what he wrote on in 2015 as well. 2015 and 2016, Do you see what they're doing in Colorado? They're taking over, Trump said at a rally in Pennsylvania. He added without providing evidence, they're taking over real estate. They become real estate developers from Venezuela. They have equipment that our military doesn't have. Can you imagine? And yeah, I do remember him giving a speech. But just imagine that these immigrants who come up here, poverty-stricken, like refugees, have more advanced equipment than the U.S. military. That's crazy. That's crazy. First of all, you really just tearing down the U.S. military, saying the U.S. military is weak, right? It's crazy. It's crazy. In the months that followed, Tamayo and Pacheco watched as Trump repeatedly spoke out against Venezuelan President Nicolas Maduro. And Nicolas Maduro will come back. He will come back in this lesson. While at the same time describing Venezuelan immigrants as criminals, that portrait didn't align with what Tamayo saw from the dozens of people that they met in Aurora. Obviously not. Because again, the campaign made it seem like all immigrants are criminals. All brown immigrants are criminals, not the ones coming from Europe, but the ones coming from everywhere else, right? They're the criminals. But like when you actually meet immigrants, And yeah, there's a lot of immigrants. When you meet immigrants, it's usually in the workforce. Like that's mostly what they come up here to do is get jobs, get money, and either to build a life for themselves in America or to send money back home to their families wherever they're from. Right? That's usually what immigrants do. All right. It said their country had completely collapsed, and so they had no medicines, no food, no anything, and so they just had to leave. Despite Trump's criticisms, many Venezuelans living in the U.S. voted for the president. You see that right there? Because, like, even with Cubans specifically, right? A lot of the Cuban immigrants voted for Trump because he was running on a platform of, hey, I'm just trying to get rid of the criminals, right? He's speaking so much about criminals, and they believed him. But now, hey, just like the Venezuelans here, they're finding out, hey, Trump's trying to get rid of all the Israelites in America. It is what it is. He hates black and brown people. It is what it is. All right. Even though I ain't racist. When have I ever done a racist thing? How about every platform that you run on, like every campaign promise that you run on, is pretty damn racist. I mean, let's just be real. But yeah, that's what he's trying to do. This is what I've been going into for the past, not last week, but weeks previous, that he's just trying to get rid of the Israelite men. He's most specifically just trying to get rid of the Israelite men in this country. All right, it's the same idea, the same spirit that was within Pharaoh. All right, they said, hey, look, these men, they're becoming more populous than us. They're going to overtake us, right? And so Pharaoh was out there killing the men babies, whereas Trump, this country already has like abortion programs. And he said that's not enough. We got to get all the immigrants out, right? They're coming in faster than we can get rid of them. Hey, we got to deport them out, right? That's what he's been running on. All right. With the whole, his whole policies are about like the whole great replacement theory. That's what his policies are based around, or at least the deportation policies. It says, despite Trump's criticisms, many Venezuelans living in the U.S. voted for the president, and despite a federal judge temporarily blocking the Trump administration from ending TPS for Venezuelans, this has not eased their fears, as many now are grappling with the rising uncertainty of their futures. Right, and if you fall for any of the politics here in the U.S., I mean, that's really your own fault. You're just not educated on the issues. I mean, it is what it is. Whether it be Democrats or Republicans, they both destroyed this country, and that's the facts. All right, this country was, first of all, it was never built to be a good place for black and brown people. I'm just telling you straight up, it never was. All right, it was built off the slavery, off the genocide of so-called black and brown people. All right. And to think it's going to be a safe haven is ridiculous, all right? Yeah, the standard of living here is better than some other countries, but to think that you're just going to, escape the curses of Deuteronomy 28, hey, that's just not how it works. You got to come back to the laws of God to escape those curses. To be saved out of those curses, you got to come back to God. It is what it is. That's why I'm doing these lessons, just to show you that point. Let's see. Presidential actions like those taken in March, when the U.S. flew more than 200 immigrants, alleged members of Tren de Aragua, to be imprisoned in El Salvador after Trump controversially invoked wartime legislation to expel them, only compound those fears, right? Because a lot of people that they sent to them prisons are actually innocent people, right? They're not gang members. Maybe they knew gang members. Maybe they talked to some gang members at one point in time. But hell, if you're in a poor community, especially in a larger city, you're going to talk to gang members from time to time. It is what it is. There's a lot of gangs in America. All right. Let's see. Keep reading. Luis, a Venezuelan-American Trump voter living in Dallas, told Al Jazeera he never thought Trump would target the relief program that keeps more than 500,000 Venezuelans, including some of his loved ones, safe from deportation. He asked to use only his first name for fear of retribution against his family. And honestly, Brother Luis, like, you should have seen it coming. You should have seen it coming. I'm just being real with you. How asleep can you be? How asleep can you be to think that? Oh yeah, Trump. He's talking about all these illegal immigrants, right? He's talking about all these immigrants. He's talking about they're all criminals and rapists and killers and whatnot. But we're good. Like wow. Like come on, bro. Come on, man. Trump never really. And Trump he'll mention like gangs, and he'll mention or like specifically Mexicans or cartel members or whatever. But come on, bro. Like it's obvious that he is just against the immigration of so-called Latinos in general, and it's not even so-called Latinos. We see he's targeting Haitians as well. All right, it's any Israelites. It's truly what it is. Any Israelites that's coming into the country, he don't want them here. All right, and he don't like Muslims either. Some of them Muslims over there are Israelites, but a lot of them are Ishmaelites. He don't want them here either. Let's see. Trump has admitted Venezuela is not safe, and I understand he doesn't want criminals, said the 34-year-old. But why does he want to get rid of honest, hardworking people? What does he want to send us back to? He does not care. He does not care about you. He does not care about where he sends you back to. Look at what happened to Kilmar Abrego Garcia. All right? He specifically came here to escape gangs in El Salvador, but they shipped him right back to El Salvador. They don't care. They're just trying to round the people up and get them out. That's what they're trying to do. All right? And as we saw with, what's his name, Mahmoud Khalil, specifically, if you're going to speak against the interests of America, right? Like speaking against the state of Israel, which AIPAC is the biggest lobby in Washington. AIPAC, that's the American Israel Pact, is what it is. It's like Political Action Committee, I think is what PAC means. But anyway, that's the biggest PAC. If you speak against that, then hey, that's the biggest lobby, I should say. If you speak against that, then they want to get rid of it. All right. Especially if you're an immigrant. But yeah, it's gonna get to the point because they've already like revoked the like born in America, you're a citizen type statute, right? They've already revoked that, so it doesn't matter if you're a citizen. It's gonna get to the point right now they're focusing on immigrants. It doesn't matter if you're a citizen though. Eventually if they want to silence you, they want to get rid of you. They're just gonna get rid of you. That's what they're working towards. But they're starting with the immigrants. All right, this is not the first. Start with the male immigrants, I'll say. Start with the male immigrants. All right, this is not the first time Trump has tried to end the program. During the first term, the president tried to strip TPS from people from El Salvador, Haiti, and other nations he infamously dubbed, and I'm gonna say it here, shithole countries. All right. Advocacy groups blocked him with lawsuits, and Marco Rubio, then a U.S. Senator and now Trump Secretary of State, co-sponsored the Venezuela TPS Act and personally lobbied for Venezuelans in a letter to then Secretary of State Rex Tillerson. And so the Venezuela TPS situation came from Trump in his first administration, but now he's walking back on it because it's got to the point where he's getting rid of immigrants. So hey, he said, hey, let's walk it back. It's time to deport all of them. However, this year, Rubio took a new position on the matter, designating Venezuela under TPS does not champion core American interests or put America and American citizens first, he wrote. So he's walking back his own policy that he had, big upped in the first term. Few other Republicans have spoken up for Venezuelans. U.S. Representative Maria Salazar from Miami, Florida, called on Trump not to punish immigrants by revoking their humanitarian parole, a pathway to legal status arranged by the Biden administration. More than 70% of Salazar's constituents are Hispanic, and nearly 1/4 are not U.S. citizens. I suppose it's talking about in Miami, because if she is I think it's just talking about people who live in Miami, as opposed to like anybody who would vote for her, right? Because like you can't vote if you don't have proof of citizenship. They came here fleeing failed communist countries, believing in Biden's empty promises, Salazar wrote. And then once Biden got into office, he sent Kamala down there to Guatemala specifically and said, hey, do not come, right? Don't come to the country. Because even the Democrats, they say that they want these things. They don't want these things, all right? The Democrats and the Republicans are the same. They're the same thing, all right? I say that, they're the devil and Satan, right? The devil is the deceiver. That would be the Democrats. Obviously, the devil and Satan is the same thing, but it's two sides of the same coin is what I'm trying to say, right? Because the devil means the deceiver, right? It means to trick you. That's what the Democrats do. They pretend like they're nice to you, and then they do something underhanded. And the Republicans are like Satan, which is the adversary, right? You know that they're going to do something messed up to you because they'll straight up tell you that's the campaign promises that they make is they're going to do something messed up to you, and then they end up doing it. Just like this Luis, right? The Venezuelan immigrant, right? Or this Venezuelan American, right? He thought it was gonna be good, but he found out that hey, Trump wasn't playing around. He's doing all the things he said he was gonna do, except he's going even harder. All right. They came, so I just read that about came here fleeing failed communist countries. Recently, Salazar celebrated the courts blocking Trump's maneuvering, even going so far as to say she had led the fight to protect TPS. In reality, the fight has been led by groups like the National TPS Alliance, which filed the lawsuit that led the courts to blocking Trump's moves. All right, so Jose Palma, a National TPS Alliance coordinator, said he's counseled hundreds of TPS recipients. We have stories of people from Honduras or El Salvador that have been in the United States for the last 25 years. He said they're at risk of losing their immigration status and getting deported, even though they have established their life in the U.S. Palma is particularly concerned about parents who are TPS beneficiaries and have started families in the U.S., which makes their children U.S. citizens. But again, Trump had revoked that as far as the children that are born in the country, right? He's even been in interviews that said, we don't want to split up families. We'll ship them all back, right? If they're ultimately deported, he said their kids will either need to stay in the U.S. without their parents or they will be forced to go to another country, right? The way Trump's been talking, he's going to ship them kids out too. Might even split them up. Liz, a native of El Salvador who is now in her 50s, arrived in the U.S. in 2001 after a devastating earthquake. Liz, who gave only her first name for fear of reprisals, said she has since reapplying for TPS roughly a dozen times, and she calls the program a blessing for my life that has allowed her to build a family and a life in a place she now considers her home. Right, and see, that's why the Bible calls this place Babylon the Great, right? Because it's the greatest country on earth. Right? Everybody's trying to flock here. All right? She said it's a blessing for my life that I've been able to come to America. Right? Some fees have increased and some documents have become more complicated, but the process has been reliable. You turn in the necessary forms, and as long as your country is on the list, you receive the status. TPS is at least one piece of the many we need in order to exercise our rights, Liz said. Even if it's temporary, it's created a lot of good for the American public, Liz said of TPS. We have TPS holders who are faith leaders. We have TPS holders who are business owners, providing employment to U.S. citizens. Carmen, a 27-year-old Venezuelan living in Fort Worth, Texas, echoed Liz's comments, calling TPS a godsend that helped her start a life I didn't know I would have. All right. So, so I'll read the rest of this. Cindy Mata, a 30-year-old community organizer in Fort Worth, has also counseled immigrants and recipients of either TPS or humanitarian parole, which is permission to enter and stay in the U.S. temporarily for urgent reasons. She said that since early this year, many under temporary status received emails from the Department of Homeland Security that began, "It is time for you to leave the United States." Part of the administration's strategy is to encourage immigrants to start self-deporting. But Mata said the Homeland Security Department's emails were not always having that intended effect. I know one person who, when they received the email, their first thought was, who else got this? Who else in the community needs advice or needs some help? That's when she worked to connect the people with legal representation and organizations like Palma's that are determined to keep TPS alive. It's a reminder, she said, that we need to stand up for each other. I'll go even further and say we need to gather together, O nation not desired. All right. But with that, with the Venezuelans in a state of uncertainty, it did mention other places, right? Other types of Americans, right? Whether it be Honduran or El Salvadorian, whatever the case may be. But let's go into the history of Venezuela. All right. So, starting with the history of Venezuela, we're not going to start here in the BCs. All that's conjecture. It says 15,000 years ago, 13,000 years ago, 7,000 years ago. All right. We'll talk about how the people really got over there when we get to the scriptures part. But we'll start with the name, the etymology of the name real quick. It says, according to the most popular and accepted version, in 1499, an expedition led by Alonso de Ojeda visited the Venezuelan coast. The stilt houses in the area of Lake Maracaibo reminded the Italian navigator Amerigo Vespucci of the city of Venice, Italy. So he named the region Venezuela, or Little Venice. The Spanish version of Venezuela is Venezuela. All right. So that's what Venezuela means. It means Little Venice, named after the same person who America is named after. That's the Italian navigator and map maker Amerigo Vespucci. All right. So calling yourself Venezuelan is really saying you're Italian. All right. Has nothing to do with the actual people of Venezuela. A different story is Venezuela is actually a indigenous word, but it doesn't say what that means, and it's not, as it says up here, the most popular or accepted version of where the word came from, right? So we'll go with the Little Venice translation, all right? So if you want to know where Venezuela is at, if you're unfamiliar with South American countries, South American territories, I'll show you on this world map real quick. Venezuela is right here, Colombia to the west, Guyana to the east, and Brazil to the south. All right. That's where Venezuela is, right there at almost the most northern part of South America. And you have the Caribbean just north of it, right? And all these Caribbean islands. Okay. So it says in 1498, during his third voyage to the Americas, Christopher Columbus sailed near the Orinoco Delta and landed in the Gulf of Paria. Amazed by the great offshore current of fresh water which deflected his course eastward, Columbus expressed in a letter to Isabella and Ferdinand that he must have reached heaven on earth. He said, great signs are these of the terrestrial paradise. All right. He said it's a beautiful land. All right. Then it says Spain's colonization of mainland Venezuela started in 1522. I need to stop doing that because I see it just keeps. That's the only thing that I have a problem with Wikipedia. And yes, Wikipedia is not a source. It's more a compilation of many different sources. All right. So I got other sources I'm going to use to back up a lot of the things that we go into. All right. Started in 1522, establishing its first permanent South American settlement in the present-day city of Cumana. All right, so I'm going to read a little bit of this, but I got another source talking about colonization. All right, so it says in the 16th century, the King of Spain. This king would be Spanish King Carlos the First. But that's the same of Charles V of the Holy Roman Empire. All right. It says the King of Spain granted a concession to the German Welser family. Klein-Venedig became the most extensive initiative of the German colonization of the Americas from 1528 to 1546. All right. We're going to read about some of the things that they did here in a minute. The Welsers were bankers to the Habsburg and financiers of Charles V, the Holy Roman Emperor, who was King of Spain and had borrowed heavily from them to pay bribes for his imperial election. All right. So in 1528, Charles V granted the Welsers the right to explore, rule, and colonize the territory, as well to seek the mythical golden town of El Dorado. Right? They knew that there was a lot of gold, and they had heard tales of a city of gold that they were looking for. All right. First expedition was led by Ambrosius Ehinger, who established Maracaibo in 1529 after the deaths of first Ehinger, I don't know how to pronounce that, Ehinger, 1533. Then Nicholas Fetterman and George von Speyer, we'll say. Philip von Hutten persisted in exploring the interior in absence of von Hutten from the capital of the province. The Crown of Spain claimed the right to appoint a governor. On Hutton's return to the capital, Santa Ana de Coro, in 1546, the Spanish governor Juan de Carvajal had Hutton and Bartolomeus VI Welser executed. All right. Subsequently, Charles V revoked Welser's concession. The Welsers transported German miners to the colony in addition to 4,000 African slaves to plant sugarcane plantations. Many German colonists died from tropical diseases to which they had no immunity, or through wars with the indigenous inhabitants, right? So it didn't talk too much about what happened with the indigenous inhabitants, though. That's what we're going to read out of the destruction of the Indies by a brief account of the destruction of the Indies by Bartolome de las Casas. All right. So let's I'll read a little bit out of this and then we'll get to it. All right. Native caciques, leaders such as Guay Caipuro and Tamanaco died in 1573, attempted to resist Spanish incursions, but the newcomers ultimately subdued them. In the 16th century, the 1500s, during the Spanish colonization, indigenous peoples such as the Mariches, themselves descendants of the Kalina, were converted to Roman Catholicism. All right, so from there, let's get this in the destruction, a brief account of the destruction of the Indies by Bartolome de las Casas. All right. If y'all don't have this book, you can get it on Amazon. It's an interesting, if not infuriating, read. It's about what the Spanish colonizers did in Latin America and parts of the U.S. as well. All right, because a lot of the U.S. used to be Mexico and used to be Spanish territory, like Florida. And it says, of the kingdom of Venezuela, it says, our sovereign Lord, the King, this is King Carlos I, or Charles V that we just read about, all right? In the year 1526, over-persuaded by fallacious appearances, for the Spaniards used to conceal from His Majesty's knowledge the damages and detriments which God Himself, the souls and state of the Indians did suffer, entrusted the kingdom of Venezuela, longer and larger than the Spanish dominions, with its government and absolute jurisdiction to some German merchants, with power to make certain capitulations and conventions, who came into this kingdom with 300 men, and there found a benign, mild, and peaceable people. Keep that in mind. The people were peaceable to the European immigrants. All right. But as it goes on to say, as they were throughout the Indies till injured by the Spaniards. Right. So even though the inhabitants were originally very peaceable, they ended up later on down the line fighting against European colonizers because of how the initial colonizers acted, right? So keep that in mind. Keep that in mind. All right. These, more cruel than the rest beyond comparison, behaved themselves more inhumanely than rapacious tigers, wolves, and lions, for they had the jurisdiction of this kingdom, and therefore possessing it with the greater freedom from control, lay in wait and were more vigilant with greater care and avarice to understand the practical part of heaping up wealth and robbing the inhabitants of their gold and silver, surpassing all their predecessors in those indirect ways, rejecting wholly both the fear of their God and king, nay, forgetting that they were born men with reasonable faculties, right? So he's saying these German merchants were worse than all the Spanish conquistadors that came before them, all right? And this is coming from Bartolome de las Casas is a Spaniard, except he's a Spaniard priest, right? He's a Catholic priest. So he's coming over there to convert people to Catholicism. That's his goal, right? So he gets there to all these different lands that the Spaniards have conquered, and he sees how these conquistadors treat all these indigenous peoples, all right? And he sees that these Spanish conquistadors are just murdering and raping, killing, and kind of indiscriminately, right? And the same with these German merchants, except these German merchants are even worse than the Spanish conquistadors, right? And he's speaking in a way, I don't know if he's sincere here as far as the way he's talking about the king, where he's saying that, oh, king, you don't even understand what they're doing, right? If you knew what they were doing, you would stop them, right? Type thing. But from what we just read in the Wikipedia article, again, Wikipedia, not really a source, but from what we read there, it seems like the Spanish king, Charles V of the Holy Roman Empire, Holy Roman Empire, Carlos I, it seems like he was in bed with these German merchants, right? It seemed like he was in agreement with them and kind of just let them do what they want because he owed this German family. So I don't know if Bartolome de las Casas is writing this in a way where he knows that he's subject to the king, so he's got to kind of flatter him a little bit, or if he's writing this sincerely, where he thinks, oh, the king is good. I'm not quite sure. Because it's not like I believe Bartolome de las Casas was righteous or anything like that, because I don't align with Catholics, right? But even he can see this and see that this is wicked and evil, right? He said, these incarnate devils laid waste and desolate 400 miles of most fertile land, containing vast and wonderful provinces, most spacious and large valleys surrounded with hills 40 miles in length, and many towns richly abounding in silver and gold. They destroyed so many in such considerable regions that there is not one supernumerary witness left to relate the story, unless perchance some that lurked in the caverns and womb of the earth to evade death by their inhumane swords and brewed the innocent Indian blood escaped, right? So he's saying, look, these Germans were devils. These Germans that you let come down here were devils, all right? So, hey, when the Israelites called these Edomites devils, we didn't come up with this. Even the Edomites was calling themselves devils, right? They were the ones that was... the Bartolome de las Casas here, he was even calling these German Edomites devils, right? Because they come down here and did such evil, all right? Went to Venezuela, I should say. Went down to Venezuela and did so much evil, all right? And he said, look, they killed so many that nobody can really attest to what they did because they pretty much wiped out the population, right? Unless there's somebody who escaped, right? Unless there's somebody who's been hiding somewhere who could tell the tale. All right. It says, I judge that they, by new invented and unusual torments, ruinated 4 or 5 millions of souls and sent them all to hell, right? Because, again, he's a Catholic priest, right? So not only does he, picture hell as like that Dante's Inferno type situation, but he thinks that these, indigenous peoples, since they were idolaters, and I'm not going to disagree there, God would not have let the enemy come against us if we had not turned against him. He thinks because they're idolaters and then these German people just come through and kill them outright, then that means they have no chance for repentance, right? Because they were idolaters, right? They didn't turn to the Lord Jesus before they died, right? Or as he sees it, right? Let's see. I will give a taste of 2 or 3 of their transactions, that hereby you may guess at the rest. They made the supreme lord of the province a slave to squeeze his gold from him, racking him to extort his confession, who, escaping, fled into the mountains, their common sanctuary, right? So he said when it comes to these indigenous peoples, oftentimes when they were trying to run away from the Spaniards, they would run to the mountains. Keep that in mind. All right? These were generally a peaceable people until they were first brutally attacked. And many of them, it was their custom to escape to the mountains. All right? And his subjects lying absconded in the thickets of the woods were stirred up to sedition and tumult or mutiny. The Spaniards follow and destroy many of them, but those that were taken alive in their power were all publicly sold for slaves by the common crier. All right, so a lot of these so-called indigenous went into slavery. All right, so let's and it's something that a lot of people don't talk about when they talk about the transatlantic slave trade, when they talk about colonization over here, is that and I bring it up all the time because, again, it's not covered enough, the so-called Latinos and indigenous over here went into slavery first before the so-called blacks were brought over here. And even in the Wikipedia article, it didn't mention that the indigenous were made slaves, but it mentioned that African slaves were brought over. All right, they were in all provinces they came into, entertained and welcomed by the Indians with songs, dances, and rich presents, but rewarded very ungratefully with bloodshed and slaughter. You see that right there? So it says they were welcomed by the Indians, right? But then they were rewarded very ungratefully with bloodshed and slaughter. He put forth his hands against such as were at peace with him. All right. The German captain and tyrant caused several of them to be clapped into a thatched house and there cut in pieces. But some of them, to avoid falling by their bloody and merciless swords, climbed up to the beams and rafters of the house, and the governor, hearing it, O cruel brute, commanded fire to be put to it and burnt them all alive, leaving the region desert and desolate. All right? So this German captain, he was very ruthless, right? Any of them who tried to escape, he led them into a place and burnt that place down. They also came to another stately province bordering on St. Martha. So St. Martha would be Santa Marta in Colombia, in modern-day Colombia, whose inhabitants did, as far as I can tell at least, whose inhabitants did them many egregious and notable services, bestowing on them innumerable quantities of gold beside many other gifts. But when they were upon departure in retribution of their civil treating and deportment, the German tyrant commanded that all the Indians with their wives and children, if possible, should be taken into custody. You see it right there? And again, we're going to get that in the scriptures as well. Enclosed in some large, capacious place, and that there it should be signified unto them, whosoever desired to be set at liberty should redeem himself at the will and pleasure as to price of the unjust governor, or at a certain rate imposed on himself, his wife, and every child's head. You see that right there? So they had to buy themselves out of slavery. They would be captured and say, okay, if you can pay yourself, if you can buy yourself, you won't be sold to someone else, right? Or you won't be forced to work for me. And to expedite the business prohibited the administration or allowance of any food to them. You see that right there? And they would starve to death. A lot of them would starve to death. Till the gold required for redemption was paid down to the utmost grain. Several of them sent home to discharge the demanded price of their redemption and procured their freedom, as well as they could by one means or other, that so they might return to their livelihood and profession. But not long after, he sent other rogues and robbers among them to enslave those that were redeemed. You see that right there? So even if they did manage to pay that price, they were, as it says right here, to the same Gaul, they are brought a second time, being instigated or rather constrained to a speedy redemption by hunger and thirst. Thus many of them were twice or thrice taken captive and redeemed. You see that right there? So oftentimes, hey, after they bought their freedom, right, got free, they would get captured again and say, okay, pay it again, right? Even if they did that, they would get captured or taken a third time, all right? But some who were not capable of depositing such a sum perished there, all right? Furthermore, this tyrant was big with an itching desire after the discovery of the Peruvian mines, which he did accomplish, right? So they moved on from Venezuela to Peru because they heard that there was much gold there. All right. Let's see. Which he did accomplish. Nay, should I enumerate the particular cruelty, slaughters, etc., committed by them though my discourse would not in the least be contrarian to the truth, yet it would not be believed, and only stupefy and amaze the reader, right? So he sat here and said, look, if I told you everything that they did, you wouldn't even believe it, all right? It was so cruel, so wicked, you wouldn't even believe it, all right? This course the other tyrants took who set sail from Venezuela and St. Martha with the same resolution of detecting the Peruvian gold in consecrated houses, as them they esteemed, right, as the Wikipedia article said, El Dorado is what they were looking for, who found the fruitful region so desolate, deserted, and wasted by fire and sword, that those cruel tyrants themselves were smitten with wonder and astonishment at the traces and ruins of such prodigious devastations. All these things and many more were proved by witness in the Indian exchequer, and the records of their testimony were entered in that court, though these execrable tyrants burnt many of them, that there might be little or nothing proved as a as a cause of those great devastations and evils perpetrated by them. You see it right there. So they burnt everything so much that they burnt any evidence, right, that they did these things. For the minister of justice who have hitherto lived in India, through their obscure and damnable blindness, were not much solicitous about the punishment of the crimes and butcheries which have been and are still committed by these tyrants, right? So the guy who was supposed to be, overseeing them, making sure that they were doing everything lawfully and legally and justly, that guy was nowhere to be found, right? He was, not, what's the word I'm looking for? He didn't really care. He didn't really care about what they did. And as I said, he was living in India, right? So he wasn't even there. Only they may say possibly, being such a one, and such a one hath wickedly and barbarously dealt with the Indians, that is the reason so great a sum of crowns and money is diminished already or retrenched from his majesty's annual revenue, and this general and confused proof is sufficient as they worthily conceive to purge or repress such great and heinous crimes. All right, so they committed great and heinous crimes, but as we're seeing here and as we're about to see, that Bartolome de las Casas here, because he knows that this is his book is going back to the king and whatnot, so he's framing it in such a way, hey, they've cost you money because by killing all these people, you're not going to be able to get like taxes and such things like that from them. And though they are but few, are not verified as they ought to be, nor do they attribute and lay upon them that stress and weight as they ought to do. For if they did perform their duty to God and the king, it could not be made apparent as it may be that these German tyrants have cheated and robbed the king of 3 millions of gold and upward, and thus these enemies to God and the king began to depopulate these regions and to destroy them, cheating his majesty of 2 millions of gold per annum, right? 2 million, I guess 2 million, I don't know if that'd be gold pieces or gold talents per year. That's what per annum means. Nor can it be expected that the detriment done to his majesty can possibly be retrieved as long as the sun and moon endure, unless God by a miracle should raise as many thousands from death to life as have been destroyed, right? So, Bartolome de las Casas says, look, there's no way you can get that money back unless God raised all these people from the dead, right? And again, it's hard to tell whether Bartolome de las Casas is saying this because he feels for the people and therefore he's trying to make a case that the king would hear, or if he literally is unconcerned with what happened to the people and is instead doing this for his gain, as far as like, hey, stop all these men from killing all these Indians so we can convert them to Catholicism, or if it's like, hey, we want some money from these people, right? So we can't get money from these people if they're all dead, right? It's hard to say what Bartolome de las Casas' motivations are here. Probably, I'm leaning towards like towards the Catholicism side, and he's appealing to the king like, hey, they're costing you money because Bartolome de las Casas wants more converts to Catholicism. That's what I'm leaning towards. I could be wrong though. Let's see. And these are the temporal damages the king suffers. It would be also a work worthy the inquiry into to consider how many cursed sacrileges and indignities God himself had been affronted with to the dishonor of his name. Right? And this is kind of why I'm leaning towards the Catholicism side. He always seems to, even all the different cases that he does seem to go back to, his priest office, right? Or at least appealing to the Catholic side of the king or whoever he intends on reading this. And what recompense can be made for the loss of so many souls as are now tormented in hell by the cruelty and covetousness of these brutish German tyrants, right? He said we could have converted them to Catholicism, but instead they're burning in hell, right? But I will conclude all their impiety and barbarism with one example. Visualize that from the time they entered upon this country to this very day, that is 17 years, that they have remitted many ships freighted with Indians to be sold as slaves to the isles of St. Martha, Hispaniola, Jamaica, and St. John, selling 1 million of persons at the least, I speak modestly, and still do expose to sell to this very year of our Lord, 1542. Right, so that's when he wrote this book, was in 1542. All right. The king's council in this island, seeing and knowing it, yet what they find to be manifest and apparent, they connive at, permit, and countenance, and wink at the horrid impieties and devastations innumerable which are committed on the coast of this continent, extending 400 miles in length, and continue still together with Venezuela and St. Martha under their jurisdiction, which they might easily have remedied and timely prevented. All right, so I do want to kind of speed through the modern history of Venezuela before we get into the scriptures. And I see that really that first article took a lot more time than I expected. All right, so you had the Spanish colonization, and then most of Venezuela became part of the Viceroyalty of New Granada, which was a lot of northern South America. All right, it says after unsuccessful uprisings, Venezuela under the leadership of Francisco de Miranda, a Venezuelan marshal who had fought in the American and French revolutions, declared independence as the first Republic of Venezuela on July the 5th, 1811. Right, so that was the first Republic of Venezuela, was July 5th, 1811. All right, and then there was an earthquake in 1812. Wow, 1812 was a year of earthquakes. Because I believe that's the same year as the New Madrid fault line last. I could be wrong, but I think that is the year though, 1812. Anyway, let's see. So from there, you had a lot of war going on. It says slavery in Venezuela was abolished even before in America, right? 1854. All right. So let's see. After a long-standing dispute in 1895, with Great Britain about the Essequibo territory, which Britain claimed as part of British Guyana, right, which would have been to the east, and Venezuela saw as Venezuelan territory, erupted into the Venezuela crisis of 1895, and in 1899, Cipriano Castro, assisted by his friend Juan Vicente Gomez, seized power in Caracas. Let's see. They had foreign debts, declined to pay compensation to foreigners, caught up in Venezuela's civil wars. This led to the Venezuela crisis of 1902 to 1903, in which Britain, Germany, and Italy imposed a naval blockade before international arbitration at the new Permanent Court of Arbitration was agreed. In 1908, another dispute broke out with the Netherlands, which was resolved when Castro left for medical treatment in Germany and was promptly overthrown by Juan Vicente Gomez in 1908. So I read that first. The discovery of massive oil deposits in Lake Maracaibo during World War I proved pivotal for Venezuela and transformed its economy from a heavy dependence on agricultural exports. Right, so they found oil in the early 1900s. Right, it prompted a boom that lasted into the 80s. All right. So it said by 1935, Venezuela's per capita gross domestic product was Latin America's highest. You see that right there? So they became rich off the oil that they found. All right, they became rich off the oil that they found. All right, so it said Gomez remained the most powerful man in Venezuela until his death in 35. The Gomez ceased the dictatorship from 35 to 45. It said it continued under Eleazar Lopez Contreras, and starting in 1941 under Isaiah Medina and Garita. All right. So it said in 45, a civilian military coup overthrew Medina and Garita and ushered in a period of democratic rule from 45 to 48. Obviously, as you can see, not that long. It said the most powerful man in the military junta from 48 to 58 was Perez Jimenez. All right. He was suspected of being behind the death of Chalbad, who died in a bungled kidnapping in 1950. All right. So it said when the junta unexpectedly lost the 52 presidential election, it ignored the results and Jimenez was installed as president. Jimenez was forced out on the 23rd of January 58 in an effort to consolidate a young democracy to three major political parties, AD, Action, the Democratic Action, I guess, and COPE, which is what, the Socialist Christian Movement? Yeah, and the Green Party, all right? And then the Union of Democratic Republican, the URD, with the notable exception of the Communist Party of Venezuela, right? They didn't want the Communist Party to rise up, but they wanted the rest of these parties to rise up, all right? I'm going to skip down because we do have a lot going on here as far as the different presidencies and guerrilla movements, all right? So it said in 73, Venezuelan presidential election of Carlos Andres Perez coincided with an oil crisis, all right, in which Venezuela's income exploded as oil prices soared, all right? And so the oil industries were nationalized in 76. This led to massive increases in public spending, but also increases in external debts until the collapse of oil prices during the 80s crippled the economy, all right? So it said economic crises in the 80s and 90s led to a political crisis. Hundreds of people were killed by security forces and the military in the Caracazo riots of 89 during the second presidential term of Carlos Andres Perez and after the implementation of economic austerity measures. Hugo Chavez, who in 82 had promised to depose the bipartisanship governments, used the growing anger at economic austerity measures to justify a coup attempt in 92. All right. So Hugo Chavez, it said the coup leader, Hugo Chavez, was pardoned in 94 by President Rafael Caldera. All right, with a clean slate and his political rights reinstated, Chavez won and maintained the presidency from 99 until 2013. All right. So from not necessarily going to talk about anything until 2013 or after 2013. It says the Bolivarian government under Maduro to the present, right? So Maduro is the current president, all right? So he's been president since 2013, all right? And he was picked by Chavez as his successor, all right? So that's pretty much a brief rundown of the political history of the 1900s, all right? 18 and 1900s, I guess. All right, so what I want to get to here is what it says here about the threat of U.S. interventions in Venezuela, all right? Revives historical tension in the region, right? Because Maduro talked about how the CIA wanted to overthrow him, all right? In 2019 and in 2024, we talk about this. All right, so I'll start right here as far as like what is the history behind Maduro's claim that he is a victim of U.S. imperialism. Maduro says that by pushing for Guaido to take over, the U.S. intends to govern Venezuela from Washington. And Washington certainly has a history of interfering in Latin America's governments. We talked about this before. All right, in the 50s, 60s, and 70s, social movements in Latin America began to challenge stratified class systems that were often hangovers from colonial rule. Left-wing movements and populist parties gained support and sometimes power in countries including Brazil, Argentina, Nicaragua, and Bolivia. In Chile, Salvador Allende became the world's first democratically elected Marxist president in 1970. In the context of the Cold War, the U.S. viewed those developments down south as a threat to the global balance of power. American security forces did not want more of its neighbors to become allies with the USSR. They also wanted to protect American businesses. That was the main point, was to protect American businesses, as we've read before concerning like Guatemala, for example, and assets in the region, fearing that any new left-wing governments would follow the example of Cuba after its revolution and throw foreign powers out of the country, right, for self-governance reasons. All right. To help stop any of that from happening, the U.S. used a range of interventionist methods. In the 60s, the State Department officials and CIA agents were intimately involved in training and assisting Guatemalan security forces who killed thousands of civilians during the Civil War with leftist rebels against the right-wing movement. And again, we've talked about that before when talking about the history of Guatemala. In the 70s in Chile, the CIA attempted to thwart Allende's ascent and later lent support to General Augusto Pinochet, the right-wing military dictator who overthrew him, right? And we talked about that in the history of Argentina, about how Augusto Pinochet was damn near the devil incarnate with all the human rights violations he did, all right? It said Pinochet's regime murdered 3,065 of its citizens and committed human rights abuses against almost 40,000. In the 80s in Nicaragua, the U.S. backed the right-wing Contra rebels to take on the socialist Sandinista government, leading to a decade of violent struggle. And we talked about that before, too. It just so happened to pick the three countries that we had talked about. This is from like 2019, I think this article was. But yeah, we've talked about all three of those countries, Guatemala, Argentina, and Nicaragua before. In Venezuela itself, the U.S. gave its tacit approval of a coup attempt against Maduro's predecessor, Hugo Chavez, in 2002. Declassified CIA intelligence briefings show that the George W. Bush administration had prior knowledge of the opposition's plans and did not share their information with Chavez. He was deposed for less than 48 hours until overwhelming popular support and loyalists in the military helped him return to power. You see that right there? So it's not like the U.S. That was so long ago when the U.S. was interfering in Latin American politics. This was 2002. All right, this has been in my lifetime. All right, so I mean, watching maybe we're born after 2002, but that's been in my lifetime, right? That's been in recent years. All right. So, like, this whole idea that the U.S. just stopped intervening in, these Latin American countries' politics, I don't know who even tries to say that at this point, that the CIA is not still intervening in these countries, but they definitely are. They definitely are. All right? And, that's why these people end up leaving their countries, is because all the unstable politics is usually a major factor. There are fundamental differences between, it says, how does Guaido compare to the right-wing groups the U.S. supported in the 20th century? There are fundamental differences between what happened in the 60s, 70s, and 80s and what is happening today. Sure it is. First, it's a humanitarian situation inside Venezuela. Soon after Maduro came to power in 2013, a drop in global fuel prices and severe economic mismanagement by the regime plunged the country's oil-backed socialist model into chaos, with many unable to access food or basic medicine. And I've talked to that before, as far as like depending on one particular export is not the best idea for a country. And I mean, I still believe that just building your whole economy around one thing, probably not the best idea. You should probably have like at least 3 or 4 different things that aren't tied to one another, so that if one does go, one economic situation does go down, you can still be all right as a country. But hey, that's a lot easier said than done. Obviously, I'm being like a backseat driver here on this situation. I've never ran a country, but still, it seems like this is accurate. Plunged the country's oil-backed socialist model into chaos, with many unable to access food or basic medicine. Over 3 million people, a tenth of Venezuela's population, have fled the country. 10% have fled the country. Arbitrary detentions and violent repression have become the norm as this regime, backed by the military, military clings to power. A second key difference is that Guaido, who belongs to the center-left Popular Will Party, does not plan to become Venezuela's permanent president. According to the Venezuelan Constitution, when the National Assembly leader assumes power in a situation like this, he must call elections within 30 days. Yeah, sure. Guaido won't try to hold on to the power once he gets it. And again, this was written in 2019. Maduro is still in power currently. Thirdly, Guaido appears to have the backing of a significant section of the Venezuelan population. Tens of thousands of people turned out for protests that he called on January 23rd, and to show support for his plan to assume the presidency. Venezuelan exiles in other countries also held rallies in favor of Guaido. Yeah, that doesn't sound like backed by CIA at all. Anyway, let's get the scriptures. Because that's where they're at today, still in turmoil to a certain extent. In Psalms 55, talking about what these Germans did. Starting from the top here. Give ear to my prayer, O God, and hide not thyself from my supplication. Attend unto me, and hear me. I mourn in my complaint and make a noise. Because of the voice of the enemy, because of the oppression of the wicked, for they cast iniquity upon me, and in wrath they hate me. All right, so they cast iniquity upon me. That goes double, as in like they do iniquity to me. But also, they cast iniquity upon me, as in, like, even Bartolome de las Casas coming there as a Catholic. He's pressed in idolatry on the people, all right? And in wrath, they hate me, right? They do many wicked things. But I just wanted the context here of the wicked. That's what it's talking about. It's talking about wicked men. As it said here on page 2. No, excuse me, that's page 56. It's 56, 57, and 58. But on the first page here, it said they were incarnate devils, right? That's what an eyewitness of the account said. It says, let's start with 15. Let death seize upon them, and let them go down quick into hell. Right. So this Catholic idea of hell, Dante's Inferno, it's mythology. All right. When the Bible talks about hell, it's talking about death. All right. When you die, that's all it's talking about. And when you read in Job 3, all go to the grave, right? It doesn't matter if you're a king or peasant or wicked or righteous, you all go to the same place, all right? So that's what, when the Bible talks about hell, that's what it's going into. For wickedness is in their dwellings and among them. As for me, I will call upon God, and the Lord shall save me. Evening and morning and at noon will I pray and cry aloud, and he shall hear my voice. We must pray to the highest, all right? He had delivered my soul in peace from the battle that was against me, for there were many with me. He said right there, and he will deliver us from these wicked men. God shall hear and afflict them, even he that abideth of old, Selah, because they have no changes. Therefore they fear not God, right? So if you want God to hear us, we have to change. Obviously, the wicked are not going to change. They're going to stay wicked. That's why they're called the wicked, all right? And they don't fear God. He hath put forth his hands against such as be at peace with him. He hath broken his covenant, right? So the people welcomed these German immigrants to the territory, right? The indigenous people, the so-called indigenous, they welcomed these people. All the European colonizers, they welcomed them initially until they turned on them. As far as the colonizers turned on the people. Even though they were welcomed with peace, right? He put forth his hands against such as be at peace with him. He hath broken his covenant. Just in the case of that we read over here on page 57 of a brief account of the destruction of the Indies, right? They made an agreement that, hey, if you paid this, you would be free. But then he sent other rogues and robbers among them to enslave those that were redeemed. All right? So just that covenant, that agreement, they broke that. All right? The words of his mouth were smoother than butter, but war was in his heart. His words were softer than oil, yet they were drawn swords. See, it was always going to turn to the sword. All right? So, from there, let's get Deuteronomy 28. Because Deuteronomy 28 talks about all this. Talks about all this that would happen to the so-called indigenous Venezuelans. All right? Deuteronomy 28, we'll get to the point, verse 15. But it shall come to pass that thou wilt not hearken unto the voice of the Lord thy God, to observe to do all his commandments and his statutes, which I command thee this day, Then all these curses shall come upon thee and overtake thee. All right. So, where is it at? Where is it at? 25? Yeah. It says, the Lord shall cause thee to be smitten before thine enemies. Right? Going to be killed before your enemies. All right. Thou shalt go out one way against them and flee 7 ways before them, and shall be removed into all the kingdoms of the earth. Right? Sent out on slave ships is what we just read about. All right. So, let's see. Let's jump around here a little. Verse 49. Actually, let's go 33. The fruit of thy land and all thy labors shall a nation which thou knowest not eat up. Right? The Venezuelans ain't know anything about the Spaniards or the Germans. Right? Not the indigenous people there. Right? As we read in the Wikipedia article, the Mariches, the Kalina. Right? They didn't know anything about Germans or Spaniards. They welcomed them, and then the people, the Germans and the Spaniards, ended up killing them. Right? It said, all thy labors. Right? You go out labor to get the gold. The fruit of thy land, all your agricultural export, all right, shall a nation which thou knowest not eat up, and thou shalt be only oppressed and crushed always. All right, only oppressed and crushed always. Where is it at? The Lord shall bring thee and thy king, which thou shalt set over thee, right, the caciques, as we read in the Wikipedia article. And we also read about how the supreme leader, where was that at? The sovereign of the people. The supreme lord of the province. They made him into a slave, and he ran to the mountains. Right. It said, "The king which thou shalt set over thee, the Lord shall bring thee and thy king which thou shalt set over thee, unto a nation which neither thou nor thy fathers have known, and there shalt thou serve other gods, wood and stone." Right. He's going to present you. The Lord is the one who's going to present you to these Germans and Spaniards, and they're going to convert you to their religions, right? The other gods, wood and stone, right? So just using Catholicism, for example, they'll bring with them the stone crosses and the wood crosses, right? But just real quick on the fleeing to the mountains. In Deuteronomy 33, these are the blessings of each tribe, all right? In verse 13, it says, "And of Joseph, he said, blessed be the Lord," blessed of the Lord be his land, for the precious things of heaven, for the dew, and for the deep that coucheth beneath. Right? So of Joseph, specifically, Joseph had children, Ephraim and Manasseh, but Joseph, and specifically through Ephraim, became the head of the northern kingdom of Israel. So all 10 tribes. All the tribes that weren't Judah, Benjamin, and Levi can be summarized under Joseph. All right, you read about that in Ezekiel 37. All right, they can be summarized by saying Joseph. And it's all throughout the prophets, but still. "And for the precious fruits brought forth by the sun, and for the precious things put forth by the moon, and for the chief things of the ancient mountains, and for the precious things of the lasting hills." You see that right there? The chief things of the ancient mountains, right? It's saying that we would find sanctuary in the mountains, all right, and the lasting hills. All right, "And for the precious things of the earth and fullness thereof, and for the goodwill of him that dwelt in the bush, let the blessing come upon the head of Joseph, and upon the head of him that was separated from his brethren." All right. So when it comes to Joseph specifically, specifically Ephraim and Manasseh for sure, but generally Joseph being the northern kingdom, we would find, especially our chiefs, would find sanctuary in the ancient mountains. All right. It says the same thing in Genesis 49. Not Exodus. In Genesis 49, concerning Joseph, I should say, says, "Joseph is a fruitful bow, even a fruitful bow by a well, whose branches run over the wall. The archers have sorely grieved him and shot at him and hated him." You see that right there. The oppressors came, hated us with a cruel hatred. And the tyrants of those is the way that Bartolome de las Casas described. All right. But his bow abode in strength, and the arms of his hands were made strong by the hands of the mighty God of Jacob. From thence is the shepherd, the stone of Israel. Right? So God is still with us, and he will make our hands strong. Even by the God of thy father, who shall help thee. All right? And by the Almighty, who shall bless thee with blessings of heaven above, blessings of the deep that lieth under, blessings of the breast and of the womb, right? Be fruitful and populous. The blessings of thy father have prevailed above the blessings of my progenitors unto the utmost bound of the everlasting hills. You see that right there? So it said the Lord would bless you in the everlasting hills. All right? As it said right here when it said, who escaping fled into the mountains, their common sanctuary, right? That's what all, because if you read in that book, a brief account of the destruction of the Indies by Bartolomé de las Casas, he goes into the people of Cuba, the people of Hispaniola, the people of Mexico, the people of Puerto Rico, right? People of Venezuela, the people of all the different parts of Latin America. All right, so that's when he said it was their common sanctuary. The indigenous, all the northern kingdom, all the brethren of Joseph would find sanctuary, find blessings in the mountains, in the everlasting hills, as it says here, right? In the ancient mountains, as it says in Deuteronomy 33. They shall be on the head of Joseph and on the crown of the head of him that was separate from his brethren, right? Because Joseph was different than the rest of his brothers. All right. Deuteronomy 28 again. So they would find sanctuary in the mountains was my point there. What else did it say? I just read about being smitten before the enemies. Read about being taken to a nation that would make you convert to their religions. All right. So jumping down to verse 49, it says, the Lord shall bring a nation against thee from far, from the end of the earth, as swift as the eagle flieth. Right? The symbol of imperial Spain was the eagle. A nation whose tongue thou shalt not understand. They didn't understand Spanish or German. The indigenous peoples. They didn't understand Spanish or German. All right? A nation of fierce countenance, which shall not regard the person of the old, nor show favor to the young. You see that right there? So it said, the women and the children they killed as well. He shall eat the fruit of thy cattle and the fruit of thy land until thou be destroyed, which also shall not leave thee either corn, wine, or oil, or the increase of thy kind, or the flocks of thy sheep, until he have destroyed thee. You see that right there? So they said, look, hey, you're going to pay yourself, or rather you're going to buy yourself out of slavery by giving us all this gold, or you're going to starve to death. And that's what happened to a lot of people. They starved to death. All right? So jumping down again, as far as verse 62, because they talked about, hey, they wiped out just about everybody. That's what he said. Bartolomé de las Casas said right here, as far as there is not one supernumerary witness left to relate the story. Right? They wiped out just about anybody. They destroyed so many. All right, in verse 62, it says, and ye shall be left few in number, whereas you were as the stars of heaven for multitude, because thou would not obey the voice of the Lord thy God. That's what it all goes back to. We didn't keep the commandments, so God took us out the way, right? He brought our enemies against us. That's what it all goes back to. This is not for our ultimate destruction, our ultimate diminishment. It's for us to return to the highest as his people, all right? The so-called Venezuelans are God's people, the tribe of Asher, actually, and we're going to get that here in a second. And it shall come to pass that as the Lord rejoiced over you to do you good and to multiply you, right, give you all this land. Give you all the land of Arsareth is what the Bible calls it. And we'll go ahead and get that here in a second after we read verse 68. So the Lord will rejoice over you to destroy you and to bring you to naught, and you shall be plucked from off the land whither thou goest to possess it. All right, and that's exactly what happened to the Venezuelans. They were plucked off the land by the Germans and by the Spaniards. All right, verse 68, and the Lord shall bring thee into Egypt again with ships, meaning slavery again by ship. All right, Egypt means the house of bondage in the scriptures, especially concerning the law of Moses. By the way whereof I spake unto thee, thou shalt see it no more again. Even though we were told we wouldn't see slavery again, God is telling us, hey, look, if you don't keep my commandments, you're going right back into it. Except this time it's going to be on slave ships. And there, once you step off the ship, you shall be sold unto your enemies for bondmen and bondwomen, and no man shall buy you. I mean, nobody's going to be able to save you. Nobody's going to redeem you out. Because even when you did get redeemed, it said they would get you again twice or thrice. It didn't matter, right? As you see here, as far as sold for slaves, right? Sold for slaves. On this last page here as well, page 58, say they remitted many ships freighted with Indians to be sold as slaves, right? That's exactly what it's talking about here in Deuteronomy 28 and 68. It's one of the curses that's found in the law of God. All right, so from there, as far as the people coming over here, how did the people get over here? The indigenous inhabitants, how did they get over here? It wasn't by some land bridge in the Ice Age. All right, that's myth. That's made up. All right, that never happened. If you believe in the Bible or in any kind of history, that never happened. They try to say that it's secular history or whatever. It did not happen. Never happened. All right, and you can look into the book History of the American Indians by James Adair. He pretty much firmly established that couldn't be the case, of why the people are not descendant of the Chinese, they're not descendant of Asians. All right, they share way more in relation to the biblical Israelites than they do as far as the culture of the Asians. All right, verse 40. Those are the 10 tribes. The 10 tribes being Ephraim, Manasseh, Simeon, Gad, Reuben, Issachar, Zebulun, Asher, Naphtali, and Dan. Those are the 10 tribes, the northern kingdom of Israel. All right, those are the 10 tribes which were carried away prisoners out of their own land in the time of Hoshea the king. You read about that in 2 Kings 17. Whom Salmanassar, the king of Assyria, led away captive, and he carried them over the waters, and so came they into another land. That other land being the land of Assyria, and the cities of the Medes specifically. All right? But they took this counsel among themselves, that they would leave the multitude of the heathen, and go forth into a further country where never mankind dwelt. All right? At that time, when this was when they had the liberty to take counsel among themselves, that was the time that Cyrus had decreed that the Jews may be freed. All right? That was the time period that they had the liberty to take counsel among themselves. All right? And at that time, during the Persian Empire, all the East had pretty much been populated by that time. All right? So the only place that they could go where never mankind dwelt was over here in the West. It had not been populated before by anyone up until that point. All right? That they might there keep their statutes, which they never kept in their own land. And that was the point of coming over here. All right? Was to keep the statutes that we never kept in the East, right? When surrounded by the heathen. And they entered into Euphrates by the narrow places of the river. For the Most High then showed signs for them and held still the flood till they were passed over, right? So the Most High calmed the Atlantic Ocean so that we could come over here to the west, all right? For through that country, there was a great way to go, namely of a year and a half, right? So it took about a year and a half to get over here. And the same region is called Arsareth, all right? So looking at the Jewish Encyclopedia, it'll tell you exactly what Arsareth is. Let me see. Let's see if I got that here. I know I got it here, but which one do I want to pull up? Arsareth. I have to zoom in big time on this. All right. So it says the name of the land beyond the great river, far away from the habitation of man, in which the 10 tribes of Israel will dwell. This is the Jewish Encyclopedia. All right. Of the 1908 Jewish Encyclopedia, I think is what that says. It's a little blurry, so I can't really tell. Let's see. Observing the law of Moses until the time of the restoration, according to 4th Ezra 13 and 45. That's what we just read. In the Bible, it's called 2nd Ezra. Some people refer to it as 4th Ezra whenever they consider Ezra and Nehemiah to be 1st and 2nd Ezra. Columbus identified America with this land. All right, and then it references Kaiserling's Christopher Columbus. All right, so Columbus came over here. He knew that there was people over here because he read 2nd Ezra 13. He said, okay, let's go get those people over there. He was not looking for India. All right, he knew exactly what he was doing. He knew exactly what he was doing. He didn't think the earth was flat. That's a myth as well. All right, he knew exactly what he was doing. At that same time that the Spaniards were doing the Inquisition, I believe it was May that year that they made the ruling to expel all the Jews from Spain, or they must be converted to Christianity. When they made that ruling, it was the same year that they sent Christopher Columbus over here to do what he did. They knew what they were doing, and they were trying to take over Israelites, and that's exactly what they did. That year 1492 in Spain is very pivotal to world history. All right, you just gotta learn it. The schools ain't gonna teach you this. Your churches ain't gonna teach you this. You gotta look into it for yourself. You gotta find it out for yourself. All right. So that's how the people ended up getting over here. That's how the so-called indigenous, ended up getting over here. Let's talk specifically about the tribe of Asher. That's who the Venezuelans are. All right. So in Deuteronomy 33, again, this is blessings of the tribes. All right, so jumping down to Asher, verse 24, he said, and of Asher, he said, let Asher be blessed with children. All right, they said that, the people of Venezuela were so populous that 3 million had left, and that was 10%. So, but also you got Brazil to the south, which is also very populous. Let him be acceptable to his brethren, right? Because they have those Amazonian tribes which like to stay secluded. They like to stay isolated from the rest of the world. That's why I said, let him be acceptable to his brethren. And let him dip his foot in oil. So that's the story of Venezuela, how they dipped their foot in oil. Right? They found oil in the, I forget when it said it, in the World War I, during that time period. I guess it was the late 1910s, right? And grew an economy based on that oil. Thy shoes shall be iron and brass, and as thy days, so shall thy strength be. You see it right there. So they are very powerful as far as concerning OPEC, right? Their oil. What does Genesis 49 say about Asher? I forget. Not Genesis 19. Y'all forgive me. What does Genesis 49 say about Asher? Where are we at? Let's see. Out of Asher, his bread shall be fat, right? He make the dough, right? He got a lot of money. And he shall yield royal dainties, right? So, as it said, I don't know if we read this part of the Wikipedia article, but a lot of Latin America actually immigrated to Venezuela because they were the wealthiest country. Their GDP was the largest throughout the mid-1900s. All right, so they were seen as royalty, right? All right, so great blessings to Asher and specifically to Venezuela. All right, so from there, let's close it out as we do with a lot of, or at least with the history of Latin American countries. We'll talk about the end of the Venezuelans, right? And the goal here. In Revelation 7 and verse 4, it says, and I heard the number of them which were sealed, and there were sealed 144,000 of all the tribes of the children of Israel. When it talks about the people being sealed, let's read what this seal is real quick. Because some people may think it's like a stamp of approval or something. And I guess it is in a certain way, but it's more than that. All right. In Isaiah 8 and verse 16, this is the seal. It says, bind up the testimony and seal the law among my disciples. You see it right there. So the students of the Lord will receive the law, be sealed with his law. We have to come back to his laws. All right. The children of Israel need to come back to the laws of God so that the kingdom can come. Now, the tribe of Judah were still 12,000. That's your so-called African Americans. And of course, I'm talking about over here in the West. So I'm not talking about the ones that's over in the east, even though each of these 12 tribes are over in the east as well. I'm just talking about the west. Of the tribe of Reuben were still 12,000. That would be your so-called Creek family Indians, which extends from the Choctaw to the Seminole and even the Muskogee. Of the tribe of Gad were still 12,000. That would be the rest of the so-called Native Indians and First Nations of Canada. Of the tribe of Asher were still 12,000. So that would be your Venezuelans, Brazilians, Dominicans, even your Guyanese, and Peruvians, Ecuadorians, all the nations of South America, most at least, besides Chile and Argentina. All right. Of the tribe of Naphtali were still 12,000. That would be your Chileans and Argentinians. And of the tribe of Manasseh were still 12,000. That would be your Cubans. Of the tribe of Simeon were still 12,000. That's your Dominicans. Of the tribe of Levi were still 12,000. That's your Haitians. Of the tribe of Issachar were still 12,000. That's your Mexicans. Of the tribe of Zebulun were still 12,000. That would be your Central Americans. Of the tribe of Joseph were still 12,000. Here, Joseph is actually a stand-in for Ephraim, because Ephraim received the birthright of Joseph, right? So that'd be your so-called Puerto Ricans. Of the tribe of Benjamin were still 12,000, right? That's your so-called West Indians. There would be your Caribbean blacks, Jamaicans, Trinidad Tobagoans, so on and so forth. But anyway, hey, we got to repent, got to come back to the law, statutes, and commandments of the highest so that we can get the kingdom, all right? I'll actually close it out with Revelation 14 and 12. Starting with verse 1, just so we can see the context. And looked, and lo, a lamb stood on the Mount Zion, and with him 144,000. And we just read those 144,000. That would be the Israelites, 12,000 from each tribe, having his father's name written in their foreheads. Jump down to verse 12. It says, here is the patience of the saints. So here is how you get that, right? Here is that seal that he's making reference to. Here's how you get to be delivered to Mount Zion with the Lamb. Here are they that keep the commandments of God and the faith of Jesus. You need both. You need the commandments of God and the faith of Jesus, all right? It's what Catholicism is not going to teach you. It's what Christianity is not going to teach you. You need God's commandments and the faith of Jesus. So with that, hope y'all learned something. Is that any relevance? Yeah, shalom, brother. Happy Sabbath. Shalom, shalom. Let me close out Matthew 26, starting with verse 6. Now when Jesus was in Bethany in the house of Simon the leper, there came unto him a woman having an alabaster box of very precious ointment, and poured it on his head as he sat at meat. But when his disciples saw it, they had indignation, saying, to what purpose is this waste? For this ointment might have been sold for much and given to the poor. When Jesus understood it, he said unto them, why trouble ye the woman? For she hath wrought a good work upon me. For ye have the poor always with you, but me ye have not always. For in that she hath poured this ointment on my body, she did it for my burial. Verily I say unto you, wheresoever this gospel shall be preached in the whole world, there shall also this that this woman hath done be told for a memorial of her. So with that, I hope y'all learned something. Hey, all those Venezuelans, look, you're going through Jacob's trouble right now. I mean, we've been going through Jacob's trouble for several hundred years now. Maybe that's a topic for another day. But regardless, it's time to repent, come back to the highest as Israelites. That's the only way we're going to get out of this, all right? We can't trust America. We can't trust the country of Venezuela, right? Because that's not established on the Most High God. That's established on, worldly politics, secular politics. It is what it is. So with that, hey, happy Sabbath, and let God be magnified.